Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. For us Michigan fans, there are plenty of storylines that have emerged over the last couple of weeks and that will emerge over the next couple of days and weeks as well. Right? I think first and foremost, we got that spring game coming up Saturday afternoon. What does this Michigan team as a whole look like? What does quarterback Bryce Underwood look like? That's probably storyline number one. Quickly emerging storyline is that spring transfer portal window opening up on Wednesday. And I want to dive into a conversation really just from a Michigan standpoint here. What positions on this football team would we like to see Michigan go out and address and maybe add over the next couple of weeks? Now, this conversation might look a lot different as we see what kind of players enter their names into the transfer portal. I want to start with just some overall thoughts. Overall thought number one, if you are Sherrone Moore and if you are this Michigan program, you are doing everything you can to surround Bryce Underwood with the tools necessary to really reach his potential and really get the best out of Bryce Underwood, especially for this true freshman year. I think the thing we've learned the most throughout spring practice for Michigan is Bryce Underwood is that guy. He is as advertised in terms of a talent standpoint. The arm strength, the athleticism, it's just a little bit different than what Michigan has seen at the quarterback position, especially from the 2024 year. So you have your guy. Now the question is, do we have the pieces around Bryce Underwood to really let him thrive in his true freshman year? You're only going to get, in my opinion, 3 years with him. I think he's a 3 years and he's going to the NFL and probably going to be a top 5 NFL draft pick. You want to make the most of it. I think the second note is Michigan in the winter transfer portal window, they made the additions that were pretty obvious on this roster. Interior defensive line. As you lose guys like Mason Graham and Kenneth Graham, we needed some veteran depth to come into this program. You did that with Damon Payne and Trey Williams. Probably wanted another difference maker at running back. You did that with Justice Haynes. You made a few additions to the secondary. You made a few additions to the wide receiver room. But I think from an overall standpoint, Michigan took the approach of we'll make the obvious additions that are necessary, but we want to give that spring practice for you. We want to give the opportunity, I should say, for the guys that we've recruited out of high school that we know we like. We want to give them the opportunity to show what they can do for us going into 2025. And now coming out of spring practice, I think Sherrone Moore has to look at this program from a really honest standpoint and say, do we have enough in the pass catcher room? Are we good enough on the offensive line? And again, I think project number one is building around Bryce Underwood, making sure he has the pieces necessary to come in immediately in 2025 and have success. Now, what positions are those? I want to get into that over the next 10 to 15 minutes. Before we get into it, as always, to the Michigan fans, y'all let it fly in the comment section. We've had a ton of healthy debate, you might say, in the comment section in terms of where this roster sits. It's been a blast chopping it up with you guys in the comment section, and the amount of support y'all have shown the fellas during the months of February, March, and April have been amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comment section. Without further ado, let's get into it, and let's start on the offensive line. And I know the pass catcher position is also a position we have to talk about, and we will talk about it in the next 5 minutes. But I want to start up front. The reason that I want to start on the offensive line is really two things. One, you talk about having a freshman quarterback. What is the number one thing that you can do to allow Bryce Underwood to be successful in 2025? Give him a good run game. We know that we have the pieces in the running back room to be elite. Jordan Marshall, Justice Haynes, everything we've heard out of those two in spring practice, this running back room, I think, significantly better than what we were in 2024. And that's not a shot at Kalel Mullings. That's not a shot at Donovan Edwards. I think that's just a fact. So we know we have the pieces in the running back room, also with Bryce Underwood's legs, to have a good run game. But it starts up front. And this Michigan offensive line in 2024 certainly went through some growing pains. I think it was a little bit disappointing to a lot of Michigan fans who kind of live and breathe this program, kind of follow this program. Are we good enough going into 2025? Here's the conversation that I think is most important. It's where are the tackles at? I look at the inside of the offensive line, Giovanni Ahadi going back to left guard, the position that I think he's most comfortable with. Nathan Afobe, we've heard some great things from. You've heard some really good things from a guy like Jake Winera coming up. I look at the interior of the offensive line, a unit that I actually thought started to play better towards the back half of 2024 and say, I feel pretty good. And quite frankly, I just don't know if we'll find offensive linemen in the portal that would come in and immediately start for this football team up front. At the tackle position, that's probably the conversation you want to have. Evan Link primary at left tackle. It was a roller coaster of a year for Evan Link. I was pretty vocal that I thought it got better for him in the back half of 2024, but it's still a position where you probably have some question marks. And this is you kind of, as Michigan fans, we just have to trust Sherrone Moore. You've had a full spring practice with Evan Link. You've had a full spring practice with Andrew Sprague. You've heard some really good things from Brady Norton. You kind of figure out where Andrew Babalow is at. In my opinion, wouldn't mind one veteran tackle that can play at a pretty high level. And I'm not saying it has to be a first-team All-American. I think my primary concern with this offensive line, specifically at the tackles, is it's not necessarily a proven position. Andrew Sprague has played one game, in that bowl game against Alabama. Brady Norton, although we've heard good things, is making the jump from the FCS to the Big Ten. Evan Link, Evan Link's, I guess this is kind of highlights the concern. Evan Link's your most experienced tackle, and he played one season as a starter, and it was kind of up and down. And then you have true freshman Andrew Babaloa. I look at it and say, spare no expense, making sure this offensive line is going to be good enough going into 2025. Do I think that Evan Link gets better going into year 3? Do I think Andrew Sprague might take a massive step in the right direction going into year 2? Yeah, I absolutely do. But I don't want to play any games with having an offensive line that could be a problem for Michigan in 2025. I want to make sure Bryce Underwood not only is kept clean in the pocket, but also has a run game to lean on. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of offensive lineman hit the portal. And if there is an offensive lineman that, has multiple years of starting at the Power 4 level, that has shown that he can play at the Power 4 level, that's a position that I would expect Michigan to go out and address. Number 2 is the pass catchers. These are really the only 2 positions that I think are glaring for this Michigan team. Now, the good thing is you've heard really good things from Donovan McCulley coming into the portal. You've heard really good things from Jamar Broder as an early enrollee true freshman. I would expect both of those players to play a really big role, especially working vertically down the field. I think at the end of the day, the conversation is very similar to what we talked about with the offensive line, and that is there's not necessarily a proven wide receiver on this roster that is a legitimate wide receiver 1 in the Big Ten going into 2025. Now, we might have one of those names that emerges on this roster currently that could be that guy, but not right now. And I guess the question is, you have a true freshman quarterback with a wide receiver room that is largely unproven. Do you want to give Bryce Underwood a wide receiver that can truly be a wide receiver 1 for this offense? I would think a lot of Michigan fans would probably answer yes. I kind of like the process. I like the process that Sherrone Moore has gone through where it's like, hey, we addressed the obvious positions in the winter portal window. We're going to give the opportunity for some of our young talent to kind of show they can be the guys in 2025. And now for Sherrone Moore, it's an honest evaluation. Are we good enough at the pass catcher position? Are we good enough on the offensive line? And what I would say is don't take any risks. If you think you could add one more guy, if you have any question marks at either of those positions, go make sure you address it over the next couple of weeks because you're only going to get 3 years of Bryce Underwood. And I would argue this is the most important year. You want Bryce Underwood having success in 2025 and riding that sucker through 2026 and 2027. You don't want to make the mistake that I feel like some other teams have made in the past with some young, talented freshman quarterbacks where you throw them out there and you're just not good enough around them. Again, we have our answer. We know Bryce Underwood is as advertised as a freshman quarterback coming in. Go make sure that he has the talent around him to be successful in 2025. Now, on the defensive side of the football, what we've heard coming out of spring, I think this is it's not a priority. If you're Michigan and you kind of envision all right, we have a certain amount of resources to address in the spring training, or a certain amount of resources to use to build our roster in the spring transfer portal window. I don't see anything on the defense that is a glaring concern. You added Demond Payne and Trey Williams. You've heard really good things from Trey Pierce and Eno Etta in terms of development going into year 3. I look at it and say the defensive line should be solid because you've heard good things from Dominic Nichols. You've heard good things from Cam Brand. I think we have a really healthy two deep on the defensive line with some legit top end players and guys like Derek Moore and TJ Guy. The linebacker position, Ernest Hausman, Jayshon Barham return, Cole Sullivan going into year 2, Jimmy Rolder still within this program, who I think is very, very good. I don't see any. I don't. Again, the conversation is like, what linebacker is going to be in the portal that could even get on the field for Michigan at linebacker? I don't really know. I think the last question mark you have to answer is probably in the secondary, and it's a little bit more of, hey, do we have enough depth? I feel better about it than I did going into spring practice because we've heard some really good things about Shamari Earls, who I think Michigan is very comfortable throwing out there as a true freshman as a boundary cornerback. We've heard some really good things about Mason Curtis going into year 2. We've heard some really good things about Brandon Hillman going into year 3. I look at it and say that that's a position that I could see Michigan maybe adding one more name just to make sure the depth is where it needs to be. And Michigan historically has liked to rotate guys in the secondary and play a lot of bodies. But at the end of the day, with the emergence of some of this young talent, I think you're sitting there and saying, we feel pretty good on defense. And I don't think there's a position that's a glaring hole. I think if you're Michigan, you only have 2 question marks. That's on the offensive line and that's in the pass catcher position. And I think all the resources should be going into those 2 positions. One, because they're question marks going into 2025, but 2, go back to how we started this thing. Project number 1 is to make sure Bryce Underwood has the pieces to have success as a freshman quarterback. We're going to find out a little bit more as we get eyeballs on the spring game and as we get a little bit more information about where this roster sits. But I think to this point, I think you only have 2 positions that are a big problem. And that's a good spot to be in, where it's we don't have 4 or 5 different positions where we have holes. We only got 2. And we can really kind of push all our resources into making sure we fortify those positions going into 2025. Again, back to where we started. Michigan, Sherrone Moore has shown that he is willing to get aggressive when necessary to make this team better, whether it's on the high school ranks, whether it's in the transfer portal. I think we're going to see Michigan make some moves at those 2 positions. It's going to be exciting to see what names we bring in, kind of see how it shakes out going into 2025. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.